All right, we're live.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever the heck in the world you are. It's V, the Guerrilla Economist, coming to you live. And guys, here's the deal. Today's a special day. We have none other than Dr. Jim Willie from the goldenjackass.com. That's goldenjackass.com. And let me tell you guys something. If you haven't done so already, if your head has been shoved up your sphincter and you have no idea what's going on, you're in for a treat. If you haven't gotten to the goldenjackass.com and signed up for the Hat Trick Letter, which is Jim's specific membership exclusive newsletter, you need to do that. You want to talk about a complete intelligence plethora of what's going on in the world, all the play-by-plays, the main characters, the main actors. This is the letter. This is the newsletter that'll get that done for you, folks. So go check it out. goldenjackass.com. Join the Hat Trick Letter. We here at Rogue Money are huge fans of Jim. We love him. We respect his work. Like I said it so many times, goldenjackass.com, theseriousreport.com, roguemoney.net. That's the holy trinity right there, folks. That is the holy trinity. It's all you need to figure out what the heck's going on in the world, because we got the play-by-plays. With that being said, without any further ado, Jim, how are you, man? How's everything going?
Oh, I'm doing very strange. That's my standard line. This is a very unusual time. This is a very stressful time. I don't know a single person right now who has avoided personal difficulties, business difficulties, and income challenges. Not a single person.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. It's a very, very strenuous time. And I think, for those of us who have the mind and the eyes to see what's going on, we understand that the pressures that are happening globally is starting to affect so many personal lives. It's those that have no clue of what's going on that still take these warning signs and they cast it to the wind.
Well, there's a lot going on in the last several months, and there's an awakening taking place. Yeah. That is affecting people who in the past have really not participated much in the observation process. It's very hard to pin this down, but there's an awakening going on. It's a quickening. The events all around us are like a climax in 10 different areas. A climax in revelation of pedophilia, a climax in the revelation of financial fraud, climax in the revelation of financial market rigging, in the U.S. dedication to war. This is not what the U.S. was made of. But gosh, I saw an article a few months ago that said out of the 240 odd years since the United States came into being, they've only been about 30 years without a war. I mean, yeah, we just have too many wars, and we depend right now on a war economy that has basically destroyed the nation. I hearken back to a comment made by Jack Ma of Alibaba at the Davos meeting, and I hesitate to call it an economic forum because there's very little economic activity there. It's all banker barbecue and drinks and probably pedophilia in the basements at the same time. But Jack Ma made a comment. He said, the United States is, bitching and moaning about their big debt, and they're blaming the rest of the world on their trade deficits. But take a look. You've got $25 trillion of military expenses in the last 40 years. What do you have to show for it?
Right.
And that is a big, big issue right now. But, in the last several weeks, the big stories have been pretty much focused on the new Shanghai contracts and the petro yuan. And I focus a great deal on Saudi Arabia. I think Saudi Arabia is the biggest pivot country right now, and the second biggest is Germany. These are, very big events taking place. Very big events.
Describe that for us, Jim, real quick. I mean, we got the petro yuan gold contracts. I'm sorry, oil contracts that have come online. Many in the West are sitting there and they're like, "Oh, look, the Chinese. They just want another gold. They just want another oil index. That's it." They still don't get the game here.
No, they don't. They don't. Most Western observers are poo-pooing this. That's my favorite word. And I use the same word when it comes to the emergence of the dual universe. Mm-hmm. The dollar sphere countered by the RMB sphere, where the West will say, yeah, you RMB folks, you can do whatever you wish. It won't amount to a hill of beans. You're never going to get a tremendous critical mass. But they're just dead wrong, because the Chinese eventually will back their efforts and their financial markets and their trade with gold. And the United States is going to continue to back their activity with derivative machinery, market rigging, and war howitzers. Mm-hmm. And the U.S. simply will not be able to compete well. The dollar monopoly is going away. The Shanghai contract will enable, for instance, Saudi or Kuwait to sell oil to the Chinese, organize it with an RMB contract, take RMB currency and with it buy gold in a proportion that they see fit, like say a quarter of any surplus amount. And lately with the low oil price, there's not a great deal of surpluses running around in the Arab kingdom. So what it's going to do is force a lot of trade payment in RMB terms. I've been making this comment for well over a year and almost 2 years. The gold standard is going to return from efforts done in the East, right, with the first activities in trade payment, right, because the East is dominant in the manufacturing sector, but the East is also dominant in oil imports. So the Chinese have set up a mechanism for oil purchase and payment in RMB terms, and that busts the dollar monopoly called the petrodollar. Next, after that, comes movement of petro surpluses, if there are any, or at least movement from their banking reserves from treasury bonds to something else like gold. I think this petro yuan contract, V, is going to start a small avalanche with early momentum building, where nations in the Arab monarchy oil kingdoms start moving away from the treasury bond dollar in their forex reserves and move toward gold. Gold in their treasury holdings, their FX holdings, or forex holdings, is going to shift from dollar to gold. And it's going to happen on the back of this oil trade that now has an RMB mechanism to it. This is very vital for undermining the petrodollar. But, there's something else going on in the oil world. It doesn't really directly relate to RMB, but it's called the Rosneft. Yes. I call it the Rosneft Oil Consortium. I don't know what you call it, V, but golly, this is just huge important.
Yes. So detail for us the Rosneft Consortium, because we've known that some major deals have been cut between Rosneft and Sinopec. Major deals, major discoveries have been done. Jim, why don't you detail that for us?
Okay, I just wrote a public article, and it was about how the Chinese are invading the petrodollar Arab oil region. There are deals with Algeria, deals with Iraq, deals with Kuwait, deals with the UAE. These are deals the likes of which you did not see 10 years ago. I'm talking about drilling, I'm talking about exploration, refineries, and in Algeria, it's a wide raft of community development, home building, port facilities. Add to that the private investment that China has lined up with Aramco in Saudi Arabia. And what it adds up to is the Chinese are getting involved all through the most important industry, the most important sector in the Arab world, which is oil. And it's going to result in a lot more RMB currency transactions. It's going to undermine the petrodollar from an economic standpoint, like a second layer under the skin. I think of it as a dagger in the heart of the petrodollar. The second layer of the skin is going to be their economies. If China has a private investment in Aramco and also announces a multi-billion economic development initiative within Saudi Arabia, they're going to be sitting on the Aramco board, and they're going to be urging the other Saudi royals, we want to pay in RMB, and that is it. And it's going to start a trend. Then you're going to get, already Qatar is using RMB in transactions with China. Then you're going to get Kuwait, Iraq, UAE. They're all going to start accepting RMB, and then you'll see that they're using the RMB oil contract. Now, down the road a bit, you're going to start seeing the gold trade note, which will be constructed precisely atop the RMB oil and gold triangle of contracts in Shanghai. The gold trade note is like, it's more than a dagger in the heart of the petrodollar. It's an announcement of the funeral. So these are very big events, but I didn't outline the details of the Rosneft Oil Consortium. This is very big. Why would Saudi offer a deal or sign a deal with Russian Rosneft to sell them oil when Russia is the number one oil producer in the world? Right. I mean, this is a very big question. It's a quintessential question for wrecking OPEC. Okay, why would Iran offer a deal and sign a deal with Russian Rosneft to sell Russia oil when oil is the number one item in production in Russia? Why do they do the same in Venezuela? Well, here's why. Saudi Arabia can now turn around and say, we signed a deal with Russian Rosneft. It's part of the vast consortium. And the Russians will manage oil viscosity and contaminant levels, and they will conduct the sales because they're very organized and all that. And, oh, by the way, it won't be in the dollar. So the Saudis can say, we didn't sell oil outside the dollar. We sold oil to Russia, and they sold oil outside the dollar. Exactly. So the consortium puts to death, makes it dead, OPEC. I've been saying since September of 16, OPEC is dead. Yep. The only reason they meet in Vienna is because they got great prostitutes there.
That's it. and booze. Jim, they love their blondes and they love their booze.
Yeah, well, they love women who were permitted the right of education, unlike in the Arab world.
Exactly. This is a major move. What we're going to see right now is less dollars chasing petroleum. And that's going to create such a negative feedback loop to the U.S. bond fraud that's currently going on that props up the entire market over here, Jim. What do you say?
Well, the West is still kind of a captured audience and captured market. Yep. I don't see. Let me back up a bit. I found it very interesting when I was reading various different articles about the launch of the petro yuan in Shanghai that some Western banks had a few significant positions in the very high volume. Okay, the first question out of the gate was, well, what's the volume like? Well, it was very high, bigger than Brent.
Yep.
Next question is, who's the players? Well, there are a few Western players and a couple that can be identified as Rothschild characters. Glencore, right. I make a position. I make a stand. This is very hard to express without emotion. I think Shanghai is where the Rothschilds have rope tied around their necks. They're going to try to control it, and they're going to get dragged by the neck by ropes on the back of trucks.
Wow.
I think they're going to see their end in Shanghai. Now,
Right.
there are a lot of naive Westerners who say, oh, yeah, the Rothschild, they control the central bank in China. They're all over the place. And David Rockefeller seeded 20 different children in the 70s and in China during numerous trips. And, the West controls all of China. It's some of the stupidest conversation I've ever heard in my life.
I agree wholeheartedly. 1,000%. They don't get it. You see, that's the problem with the Western. I mean, the West has been in the center of things for so long. We are on the outside looking in, but yet we still think that we're calling the shots here. It's the craziest thing in the world. These Western elitists are not gods. They've been outplayed. They're on the losing end, and people don't get it.
Yeah, well, I think they just have too many memories of the glory days where they installed the skull and bones player called Mao Zedong. This is not Mao Zedong all over again. No way is this Mao Zedong and communist revolution redux. No way. The Chinese are now the capitalists. The
Right.
United States is now the socialist. There's been a complete switch. The United States has no concept of capitalism and business growth and development. All we know is handouts and military sales. That's all we know. We haven't even begun the infrastructure development and the reindustrialization of the United States. Our big flaw, our big Achilles heel is our trade deficit. We outsourced our industry since the 80s. We now have 30 years of outsourcing, a climax in the 2000 decade. It went to China. Before that, it was Pacific Rim, Japan, etc., Taiwan, Hong Kong. Okay, now we are seeing the fruits, the bitter, ugly, toxic fruits of outsourcing our industry. And I point to Germany. They did not.
Correct.
And they continue to have export surpluses. They continue to be a strong economy. They're dealing with the elitist and the Brussels bullshit, with the Arab human garbage, where they're permitted to do rapes, permitted to do robberies, and they're handed properties at discount prices on eminent domain. You cannot criticize the Arabs. They're wrecking their society. They got 1 million Arab human garbage units entering Germany per year. And, we got pretty much the same thing going on in the United States, but it doesn't get the publicity.
Scary.
Germany did not outsource its industry. In the 80s and 90s, they conducted a lot of very important national labor union conferences where they agreed to 15% pay cuts and a commitment by the German corporations not to export their industry, not to outsource, not to shut down mills and factories, not to abandon their workers. The United States is a site of national treachery and treason.
Correct. Exactly right. I mean, we've been absolutely raped and pillaged and left. I mean, the American middle class is gone. It doesn't exist anymore, Jim. I mean, everybody's waiting around for, there's going to be 10 million factory jobs ready to go. Not a single shovel anywhere has hit the ground in the United States for opening of a new factory anywhere.
But that might change soon. There's a report that Apple is opening a new plant in the United States, and there are a dozen other stories like that. But as you say, not a shovel has lifted. I'm waiting for the shovels like you, V. Yeah. I hear about the stories, but golly, will there be another set of 10 stories in the next couple months where the companies say, well, we wanted to do that, but the U.S. government got in the way and we couldn't get any property tax and income tax breaks, and we wanted to do it, but we had too many obstacles.
Right.
Federal obstacles.
Right. And now with the
maybe
steel
Nancy Pelosi wanted a bribe. You know,
Nancy Pelosi.
We need to get rid of the rubbish in Congress. You know, I don't talk about the two-party system being Democrat and Republican. I talk about the two-party system being fascist neocons as opposed to populist, which includes some of the Tea Party.
Right.
I believe our Congress is 70 to 80% overrun by the fascist neocons. I don't care if they have blue or red underwear or vests. I care whether they're dedicated to the globalist fascist regime and agenda, or whether they defend the Constitution and want to do what's right for the country and the citizens and the households. It's 70 to 80% neocon. It's an amazing phenomenon, but they're all pretty much enemies of Trump.
Yep.
I'm not a huge fan of Trump. I see a lot of weird stuff going on. I don't want to get into a Trump being good or bad discussion, but I see a lot of hope, and I wonder, hey, Donald, any news, any update on the $1 trillion infrastructure project that you ran your campaign on?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, one of the things that's disturbed me, he's got the three stooges of the apocalypse, Jim. He's got Mike the Pompous Pompeo. He's got the Waffle House waitress, Nikki Haley. And he's got the maniacal mustache that's come online right now. The maniacal mustache, John Bolton. So this is a continuation of the murderous, insane foreign policy. That's where all this is going, it seems like.
Yeah, I know. And you know, I talked to the smart guys on my group of colleagues. I mention them often, but I don't identify who they are. They prefer it that way. I call them the jackass colleagues, but The Voice is one of them, and London Paul is another, and Euroraj is a third, and George of the Comex, and there are a few others, and they're all smart guys, and we talk about this stuff once in a while. What we believe, and this is not a uniform opinion, what we believe within our discussion is that Trump will put forth and push out into the front a fascist neocon idiot and allow him to look bad and then get replaced. We've seen that with a few.
Right.
So, but what confuses me is the replacements seem to be more of the same.
Worse. Yeah. Or worse.
Or worse. It's hard to say. I don't really know. Maybe some of these clowns are just hired to be bombastic and stupid so that they can get their trial balloon shot down and we can get on to business of, a more realistic nature. I don't know. Politics in the United States has become treacherous, become deadly. You try to reveal something about the Democratic National Committee and, 3 days before testimony, you commit suicide. I believe that there have been at least 15 murders by the Clinton group since the presidential campaign began in early 2016.
Right.
And not a single prosecution.
No, not anywhere. I mean, we had one guy, he died by weightlifting. A bar came down on his neck, Jim, and he just died like that, it's unbelievable.
Well, that sounds a whole lot more reasonable than a self-inflicted gunshot wound from 3 meters away, 10 feet away.
To the back of the neck.
My point is that we have a fascist neocon takeover of the U.S. government that began in 2001 on a very ill-fated September day. They installed the fascist manifesto called the Patriot Act. Trump is trying to use the Patriot Act against the elite right now. And the tribunals that are arranged, if that ever comes to pass, will be managed by generals who were dismissed by Baby Bush, Clinton, and Obama. So there is some extreme irony involved. I want them to get on with it. I'd like to see 100 elites hanged. But for those naive who think, oh my gosh, they're going to seize hundreds of billions, if not a few $1 trillion of elite money, and that'll pay off the U.S. government debt. That's another moronic concept. Imagine just a few elites are put in prison for sexual slavery, child murder, extortion, and racketeering, just for starters. And they're hanged. Imagine those three have, let's just say, $40 billion in wealth. Well, in what form? What, cash lying in shoeboxes? No, they own, say, 10% of IBM. They own 20% of a few different military industrial complex arms makers, weapons makers. And they own a good portion of Wall Street banks. What are they going to do? Sell all that stock and pay off the government debt? I don't think so. You got to think through this. Most people don't think through the surface.
Right.
So if they confiscate a lot of elite wealth, how are they going to liquidate it? They're not. So I don't know what this confiscation is going to result in. They don't tend to have a lot of cash lying around. They tend to have secret offshore bank accounts. They have companies that are with offshore locations and headquarters and paperwork, registry of companies like in Cayman and elsewhere.
Yeah. Right.
And they have stock, and they have preferred stock, and they have government bonds. They have company corporate bonds. And these are not things that are easily sold to pay off the government debt, you dumbass people. So
exactly right.
Anyway, this is going to turn very weird very quickly, and it's going to be exciting. I remember the voice told me a good 6 or 8 months ago, Jim, you're going to have to wait and wait and wait for the Shanghai oil contract in RMB terms. Expect a couple of delays, but when it comes, start the clock. I said, the clock for the dollar demise? He said, yes, start the clock.
Yep.
That is the key event. And then later we saw the Shanghai oil gold contract, which is a very strange contract. Why would you want to do an ARB of gold versus oil? I'll tell you why. It's not for a transaction. It's for the underpinnings to link gold and oil again.
Correct.
The gold-oil ratio is out of whack. And when it got messed up, the United States got in trouble. You cannot have a rising oil price and then have the United States avoid their typical responsibility of raising interest rates. In the early 90s, instead, the United States set up a whole bunch of different derivatives. So we would have like these synthetic interest rate hikes. It's just incredibly weird stuff the United States did in the face of its insolvency in the 1990s. So a lot of stuff is going on behind the scenes, and the derivatives have been discredited. Remember the quotes in 1, 2, and 3 by Sir Alan Greenspan? The United States and the Western banking system has successfully offloaded risk in the form of derivatives to keep stability in the system. 3 or 4 years later, the subprime bonds broke wide open. Lehman was killed. Lehman didn't just die. Lehman was killed by J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs. They bought a couple $1 billion worth of mortgage bonds and never paid for them.
Right.
So it was suffocation of putting a plastic bag over the Lehman Brothers' head at the Wall Street party. And they died, and they called it a natural death.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like Scalia dying in Texas, and they found him with a pillow over his head and called it a natural death.
They said that he usually likes to sleep like that, Jim. They said that he usually likes to sleep like that with a pillow on his face.
Yeah, well, that sounds just fine. And they probably found feathers in his lung cavity. Anyway, the point is that these derivatives failed. Lehman was a sacrificial lamb. By killing Lehman, they enabled the takeover of AIG, and recall that Goldman Sachs was given 100 cents on the dollar on all their credit default swaps. Nobody else got 100 cents on the dollar. So that's just insider monopoly control. But the point is, the derivatives did not succeed in avoiding the risky situation and the unfortunate outcome. Foreigners responded by selling off their treasury bonds, partly out of need because the oil price went down, but partly out of disgust because they saw the TARP bill, $700 billion stolen. They saw the impunity of Wall Street banks. They saw the U.S. turn around and create ridiculous policies like QE. My gosh, QE is not stimulus. It's economic death. Since when is hyper monetary inflation not destructive to an economy? Well, since the fascist neocons declare it so. These fascists, the neocons, they destroy everything in their past. All you have to do is read history. Every socialist nation like Argentina destroyed their economy. And the United States is no different since 9/11. No different. Right. QE is the slam of the gavel on the U.S. economy and the financial system. Yep. After the Lehman incident in 2008 was the slam of the gavel to demonstrate that the U.S. financial system is insolvent. QE is nothing more than a guarantee of liquidity to prevent insolvent banks from going bankrupt and entering financial failure. How'd that work out? Okay, we have the Fed now with $4 trillion worth of paper junk. How'd that work out? My gosh, buyer of last resort is not a badge of honor. Mm-hmm. That's a corporate emblem of a toxic sewer.
Right.
Okay. We have a lot of turning points, and now that the debt limit has been suspended and just terminally increased, we're back over 21 trillion. We're likely to see $1.5 trillion deficit or more this year for the federal government, U.S. government. We're likely to see 600 billion or more in the trade deficit. And for those naive folks who believe that the U.S. can quickly go to a gold standard, I got news for you. 600 billion in trade deficit translates to 13,000 tons of gold forfeited in the first year. If you don't like the gold backing of the new dollar and you prefer, say, an oil backing, well, then how do you like 80 strategic petroleum reserves forfeited in the first year? How about the second year? Nobody is willing to put up the gold for the U.S. new dollar because no one wants to see 13,000 tons of gold forfeited in the first year. The prerequisite is to reindustrialize the United States, a process which has not even begun.
Exactly correct. I mean, they're literally running out of tricks, Jen. They have nothing left but their paper manipulation and that propaganda that they're still masters of the universe. And I think the whole rest of the world is waking up to the fact that the emperor has no clothes.
Yeah, I'd like to read to you something that The Voice wrote to me just in the last couple of weeks. He wrote, "The U.S. is now caught in an asymmetric war whereby certain weapons trap its military in a way that it cannot escape. Refer to cheap $200 items which wreck multi-million-dollar equipment, seen in Iraq with interactive explosive devices called IED. It is not a question of money but brains. The Pentagon has too much money to burn and not even keen strategic thinking at work. Their arrogance will be their undoing. The U.S. does not have the scientific expertise any longer to get the job done." And I add to this, that's just a short quote of many things. He says that Russia and China have and will render U.S. military weapons useless and obsolete. Many demonstrations have been given, which some Pentagon brass comprehend. But the neocon warriors continue to play their aggressive games at great peril, ignoring the strategic shifts in weaponry. They are caught in a time warp. There are trillions of dollars in taxpayer money, which have been flushed down the toilet on dead-end technology, as well as trillions wasted on endless and pointless wars. Most U.S. wars have a hidden motive of economic nature, usually to obstruct an energy supply, like for Europe with Ukraine.
Right.
Okay, we are caught in a trap. The East is moving ahead economically. I like to say China cuts deals for commerce and economic development, where the United States cuts deals for weapons sale and destabilization in the region. Our strategy doesn't work. It's pure fascist neocon.
Yeah.
It does not work. We destabilize and wreck Iraq. How'd that work out? My gosh. The Iraqi Reconstruction Fund was not set up for reconstruction of Iraq. $2.3 billion of it was stolen by Kissinger. These are slush funds that get created, and the elite come in and pilfer. We did not do any reconstruction of Iraq. We did weapons demonstrations like the phosphorus bombs to see how effective the Ramallah devastation was, where we dropped the phosphorus bombs. Now, since deemed effective in the test runs in Iraq, they're being used in Yemen. We don't do reconstruction in Syria. We didn't have the gall to set up a reconstruction fund. Instead, we had hidden ISIS control with the Pentagon, Langley, and Israeli army involved, using funneled Saudi weapons. So anytime you hear about a Saudi weapons sale, think of underground railroad to feed and supply the ISIS guerrillas in Syria and Iraq.
Yep.
Okay. Our strategy is constantly war and weapons while we obstruct economic progress.
Yep.
It just does not work. And the rest of the world realizes this. And they're awakening, except, countries like the Baltic states, where the morons were pretty much taken over by the Pentagon. This is very sad. The United States is now caught. The East has an avenue out, and it's going to get some very heavy traffic. It's an avenue out of the dollar sphere. It's an avenue away from the petrodollar for oil sales. We now have the launch of the petro yuan. I'm very curious to see what other Asian nations, like Korea, Japan, Taiwan, what Asian nations sign up and start using it to bring about a little bit more price stability for an important item like import of oil. At the same time, that's the buyer side. The seller side, I'm very curious to see what Gulf region Arab monarchies are going to use the Petro Yuan contract in Shanghai as suppliers. Yep. Because this is the essence of the gold trade payment system. Get away from the dollar. Use the RMB as a caretaker and eventually move to the gold trade note to secure oil sales. So the gold trade note might be built upon the Shanghai oil gold contract. That's what I expect to see. And it's going to work hand in hand with the RMB oil contract for those who are bold enough to use it. And apparently it's got quite a lot of volume. And the nice thing about volume and diversity is that little guys will say, well, the big ones are already in, so I'm joining too. And then comes the critical mass. So the United States is losing its control and very heavily dependent upon derivatives. Right. I'm wondering how the United States is going to fund seriously, how is it going to fund its $1.5 trillion deficit this year?
Well, that's a good question. You know, one of the things that I brought up, and Jim, I've been saying this for years, the United States' biggest exports are trash, recyclables, and pornography, apart from the weapon sales. So it's kind of funny.
Don't forget bond fraud and diabetes.
Oh, yes, bond fraud and diabetes. How can I forget that as well? And it's pretty hilarious that at the time when China is about to hit back in a trade war, the U.S. is begging, hey, please, don't stop the buying of our trash and recyclables. Please keep accepting it. And it's pretty funny because once that gets cut off, there's no way for these idiots to fund anything. The path forward for the United States has always been to work with China. But the neocon Nazi fascist scumbags have ruined that chance. And they're ruining and salting the fields, Jim. They're salting the fields of any sort of real progress from happening within the East-West partnerships that could be formed here. It's terrible to see this.
It is. I'd like to point to some specific trade deals that are about to be interrupted. The United States has, for many, many years, been selling grain like wheat and corn to China. And now the Chinese have lifted a certain ban, which had been an obstacle for importing Russian wheat. Now, with the new trade friction and tariffs that are stupidly put in place by the Trump administration, I hate saying that. The wrong-footed trade tariffs that are being slapped on China have resulted in China canceling a grain deal and signing it instead with Russia. The same trade tariffs and pressure against China have resulted in the Chinese canceling a soybean deal with the United States and signing it instead with Brazil. These are two very big multi-billion-dollar trade deals that have been on the books for many years, and the Chinese are finding alternatives. Without really recognizing the change, the United States now has a formidable competitor in agricultural exports. It's called Russia.
Correct.
I did a story back in 2015 and followed up a little bit in 16, where the Russians are developing the fertile areas in I'm not even sure what to call the region. The Urals, the steppes. I think it's the steppes. But these are not populated areas except the people operating the agricultural farms. with tractors and automated equipment and fertilizer. They got it all. They're doing very well. It's a tremendous growth story in Russian agricultural export, while in the United States, we have depleted soil, dependence upon fertilizer, nitrogen depletion, while Halliburton accidentally dumped 1.3 billion gallons of toxic water in the California aquifers without a single EPA violation cited against them.
It's amazing to me. I mean, where do I begin? Where do I begin with that one, Jim? We're gone. I mean, we are literally just gone.
We're sabotaged, V.
It is. It's
the elites have sabotaged us. It's so pernicious that a pesticide called glyphosate has been called an antibiotic by the FDA.
Well, people in California, I mean, that explains a lot of things of their politics there,
Okay, there's something else regarding this trade friction. We had a deal signed, I think it was around October or November last year, where China had their own semi-holy grail energy deal to purchase Alaskan oil and gas from the United States. Now, it was not of the same magnitude as the Russian-Chinese deal to stretch 20 years, but it was rather significant, the Alaskan oil and gas deal with China. Now, if we're going to increase this level of trade friction and impose tariffs, are we going to impose a tariff on our own export of oil and gas to China? I mean, come on. We're getting really dumb.
Yes.
We're getting dumb. And there's another angle to this Alaskan oil and gas. I revel in looking at this. This is a guarantee that China can buy U.S. oil and gas from a relatively undeveloped area called Alaska and pay for it in treasury bonds.
I love it.
Not only that, but if there are any pipelines that are to be built, like under the Bering Sea, and connect to the Alaskan landmass to the Russian landmass, and eventually with facilities that reach China, that infrastructure also will be built by payments based in treasury bonds. It's called indirect exchange, dumping of treasuries between two parties that don't involve the United States for construction purposes. It's a new phenomenon that China's gotten very proficient at.
Yeah.
Like with deals having to do with Iran or deals in Africa, building a Djibouti naval base and port facility. It's all done on the back of treasury bond dumping. So who's buying all these treasury bonds? It's the machinery at the U.S. Department of Treasury called the Exchange Stabilization Fund. Okay, the point is that China has found a way to dump their treasuries and buy American oil and gas out of Alaska. But here's just a zinger. Will that be a critical part of returning Alaska to Russian hands? I mean, we're so deceived that we're not even permitted to take a look at the Russian lease of Alaska. I did not say safe. The Russian lease of Alaska. Okay, so we're making a lot of mistakes. I make a point, V. I've made this point many, many months now. Every single foreign policy initiative, program, and action by the United States since 2001 has been a bitter, ugly, and dismal failure. Find one success.
Not one. There isn't a single one anywhere.
Nowhere. It's all bluster, chest pounding, waving the flag, and a few months later, oops, looks like that went sideways.
Yep.
Okay. Right now, Libya is moving into the Chinese camp for oil production. After
Correct.
the United States and Britain stole their 144 tons of gold. Since when do we have the right to go in there and murder a leader?
Correct. Never.
Okay, every single area. Syria, a disaster zone. Syria is where the United States and Israel were revealed as running ISIS. Syria is where the oil pipelines will be built with Chinese and Russian watchful eyes to deliver Iranian gas to the European market, while the Germans had a workaround. Nord Stream 2, they just signed it amidst huge Washington pressure. They just signed the deal for all of permits, and all eyes are on Denmark for possibly blocking this. But I'm giving very solid word that even if Denmark blocks this, the Russians will work it around Denmark and say, F you, you're out, the transit fees, idiots.
Yep.
Everything we do is a failure on the foreign policy. All the trade unions, a failure. The Russian-Ukraine war, a failure.
Failure. Right.
The Turkish stream is working south of Ukraine. The Nord Stream 2 is working north of Ukraine. Germany wants the oil. I'm sorry, they want the gas. Germany has been very clever, V. They've gotten around a lot of these Russian sanctions by setting up German subsidiaries inside Russia, and the output goes to the Russian clients.
Right. Right.
Dozens and dozens of companies, including the bigger companies like Mercedes and, Metallschaft and Siemens.
Yep. Volkswagen as well.
Volkswagen. There are a lot of big German names, and they're all across Germany. Like never before, you Washington neocon morons. Nothing you do works. So I hope that they're caught on the pedophile, child and sex, slavery, and murder. I hope they're caught, and I hope they're hanged.
Yep. Or worse. Or worse.
Well, I like the Russian method. Cut their balls off, stick them in their mouth, and hang them.
That's it. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I would.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about. I don't know if we're ever going to see stuff like that, V. I just don't know if we're going to get the satisfaction of watching Hillary swing by the neck.
With her balls in her mouth.
Well, how about Michael LaVaughn Robinson?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, a.k.a. Michelle Obama.
There you go.
Gosh, I got
exactly
pictures.
Correct.
I got pictures of Michael Obama with embarrassing wardrobe malfunctions. Like a sheer dress and a breeze hits the stage, so the outline of his full crotch in the green dress is made. I got pictures of Michael Obama with his Hair Club for Men ID card. But, better than that, V, I've got two clients. Well, actually, one's a friend and one's a client. The client told me, Jim, I live in Chicago. I have black business friends, and they are part of the black business community, and everybody knows that Obama is gay and purchased Michael as a wife for political purposes. But my personal friend, Jim, he told me, I have a black friend who is a member of the gay bathhouse in Chicago, where both Rahm Emanuel and Obama are members. And wow. I know Reverend Wright, and I know Obama paid $25,000 for the beard. That's what they call a fake husband, a fake wife, rather. He paid $25,000 for Michael LaVaughn Robinson, 1987, middle linebacker, Oregon State University football team. Boy, I'd like to see those photos online. I bet you they're not there anymore.
Right. Wow.
So, when is Michael going to get outed? I don't know.
Well, she's supposed
really
to be running in 2020.
Maybe 2020. He might run for office. Who knows?
Yeah, he might.
And he might get a lot of votes for people who are on food stamps.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, we're getting silly here, but the point is that foreign policy is dominated by errors, and the errors are getting more flagrant and important.
Right.
They're getting so big that they're likely to topple the dollar. Take, for instance, the last June, the Saudi visit by Trump and the ballyhoo for lots of different weapons deals. Not a single weapon deal was new. They were all part of the Obama administration.
Right.
That was some sort of a weird deal where a symbol of some kind of a glass egg was handed, and it had significant meaning regarding a different project with glass in the name, which really meant that the United States AWACS would continue to fly over Saudi Arabia to offer them intelligence information. I mean, we don't tell the truth much anymore. I'm very curious about this $400 billion Saudi economic bill that Prince Salman, who, by the way, is not in a robe but is in a Western type suit. I didn't see a tie, just a jacket. That's how I made presentations in the Cambridge House conferences in 05, 6, 7, and 8. I never had a tie. Salman announced and cut deals with the United States, $400 billion worth. $120 billion are in weapons deal. Okay, naturally, if there's a U.S. Commercial deal, it's dominated by weapons. But there's also aircraft for Boeing, I think pharmaceuticals, telecommunications, and construction equipment. There's a lot involved in this. So and you can focus on the weapons if you want, but I like to focus what's not the weapon. $400 billion deal, $280 billion of it is not military weapon. That's significant. They boast of 750,000 new jobs being created. Well, where? In Saudi or the United States? I don't see any Saudi investment in U.S. new businesses.
Right.
So we're talking about more outsourcing of jobs, not in the United States. I want to know what companies and countries are going to invest in the United States. And I'll tell you, very simply, not much, because we interfere. We put in federal regulations. We don't give them the income tax breaks. The local areas don't give them the property tax breaks. We need 30,000, 20,000 new businesses a year for 3 or 4 years. We need 100,000 new companies with a few thousand employees each. We need to end NAFTA and bring back a lot of industry for cars and trucks to Michigan and Ohio and Indiana.
Right.
We exported our legitimate wealth. I remember sitting in my Digital Equipment Corporation office with 3 guys, my buddies, looking at the Wall Street Journal, reading about the lunacy of Intel moving their chip fabrication plants to the Pacific Rim, and we all said the same thing. This is going to end badly. If this becomes a bigger initiative to export our industry, what's our legitimate wealth? And we actually sat around and laughed and said, probably stock market bubbles. We were a smart bunch. We were an independent, different consulting group for marketing research within Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC, D-E-C. Mm-hmm. And the only surviving elements from the company were our clients. My gosh, talk about the mistakes. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot in marketing research there, and I loved my time. It was 13 years there. And I had an office twice in the big mill in Maynard, Mass., and it was a lot of fun. It was some of the best years of my entire life were from 1980 to 93, postgraduate school. Got my doctorate at Carnegie Mellon, and my first 2 jobs were in Digital Equipment Corp. First one was in quality control. Second one was in marketing research. Made a lot of friends. I was on the intramural softball team for 12 years. I was a manager for 3 or 4. It was just a heck of a lot of fun. I had some wacky friends, a lot of young ones. Some of them were deadbeats in the company, and we just wonder how long is Mark going to continue there because he doesn't do anything. It was a lot of fun. Anyway, back to the U.S. We need to reindustrialize. Don't know how it's going to happen. Right now, I think Trump has been trying without success to get foreign nations like Japan, even China, to invest in our industrial buildup. And they don't want to do it because Trump is asking for gold.
Right.
And they realize that 13,000 tons of gold in just the first year. So we got some lunatic ideas of, developing the gold in the Grand Canyon, which has been declared national parks, releasing that. But, you can't get around this, V. No. At the $1,300 gold price, it's 13,000 tons of gold a year forfeited from the trade deficit. We can't get around it. We need to reindustrialize before we go to a gold standard. Exactly. If we have to go to a new dollar, I call it the new Scheisse dollar because our fundamentals are third world. If we have to go to a new dollar that's domestic only, it's going to suffer devaluations of 30% a year.
Right.
Or worse. And that's how we import inflation to the U.S. economy after 30 years of exporting it.
Yep. Exactly correct. Jim, we're up to the end of the show. Why don't you give out your website, detail a little bit about the hat trick letter, and your closing comments. Go for it, sir.
Okay. Back in May of 2004, I started this newsletter. It's been an exciting ride. At first, for the first, 4 years, it was a single newsletter, single publication, single report. But between 2008 and 2017, it was 2 reports, the macroeconomic report and the gold and currency report. Now it's just one report. It's the Global Reset and Gold Report. It's pretty hard and needless to prove that the U.S. economy is a wreck and the financial markets are rigged and the big banks and financial structure are insolvent. It's a useless point because I've already proved it and now we're seeing it. So I went to a single report in January. I'm no longer making 10 and 12 pages in a major point that the U.S. economy is a wreck. It's well understood now to be a wreck. So we got a single report, the Global Reset and Gold Report. It's V, it's a labor of love. For March, the titles for the chapter title were Global Financial Reset Update, The Fading American Empire, Trade War Rages in a Backfire, the U.S. dollar decline due for a correction. We're likely to see a bit of a rise in the dollar, but very temporary. The next chapter, Debt Overload and Saturation. All we got is debt in the United States. That's the only growth area we have. Next is Oil Battleground and the Chinese Invasion. And finally, Gold Faces a Moment of Truth. I have a section of quotes. Here's a great quote by Nasser, the 1970s leader of Egypt.
Egypt, right.
The genius of you Americans is that you never make clear-cut, stupid moves, only complicated, stupid moves, which make the rest of us wonder at the possibility that we might be missing something.
That is
amazing. Let me close with John Pierpont Morgan's quote in 1912. I should not allow a man to be associated with me that I thought was a fraud, simply because he owned a bank, which at that moment was solvent. Money is gold and nothing else.
There you go.
That's Morgan, the J.P. Morgan founder. Anyway, goldenjackass.com is the website. Right this month, next month, concluding 14 years. It's been a lot of fun. 168 reports. It's been a tremendous amount of fun, tremendous amount of work. You know, a little bit of heartache and stress, but I recharge my batteries pretty well, and I get some help from my friends. So in the website, there is a free domain, and that free domain has the public articles and it has the public interviews. I try not to repeat an interview unless they provide a link. If they don't, I just decline the invitation to repeat if it happens to come. Now, in addition to that, not to be confused with the free domain area, is a newsletter. And the newsletter is, as I described, the Global Reset and Gold Report, and it's a paid publication. And got subscribers, paid subscribers, and you know, the banks try to get in the way. I had a funny situation just this past weekend. A woman in Manhattan said, "Jim, I tried to sign up for your newsletter. A renewal was blocked by my Chase Bank, and I have a new card with a new expiration by Chase Bank, and I can't get the replacement order to be done. What's going on?" I said, "Well, Wall Street banks block payments for the newsletter." There's proof that I'm on the right track. So, you know, she worked around it with using a different credit card. No problem. Anyway, so here we are, and we're at the forefront now of a new chapter where the East will command a critical mass of commerce which result in banking reserve changes. And the IMF facilitated this by adding the RMB Chinese currency to their SDR basket of currencies. It's now 5. The dollar, the pound, the euro, the yen, and now the RMB, which is the Chinese yuan. We're at this new chapter. The channels are there. And now watch everything grow to critical mass. Going to be interesting, V, and it's going to be exciting. And I expect the United States is going to declare peaceful coexistence. I call it the dual universe.
Okay.
We cannot.
What do you mean by? Go ahead, Jim.
Okay. The United States cannot stop the movement, the progress in the RMB as a trade payment vehicle. We cannot stop that.
Right.
The Petro Yuan contract in Shanghai guarantees its usage. It's going to be used. I think it's going to be used primarily by Asia and the Middle East at first. I'm very curious to see how London and Europe and the United States try to participate in order to mess it up, to throw some gum in its works, as we usually do. United States cannot stop this. And on the other end of it, you're going to see Asian countries and Middle East oil monarchies trade out, dump treasury bonds, and bring in gold into their banking reserves.
Yeah.
And I think this is eventually going to follow the Basel Plan, V. The Basel Plan for a global crisis is for central banks to load up on gold and have a radical increase in the price of gold so that they can get out of their corner holding toxic bonds.
Yep.
So it's all coming. It started. The process has been waiting for this event that took place on Monday. Now we have it. We're into the third day of it, and it's exciting. It's exciting, and a lot of attention is going to be drawn. At first, the Western press is going to denigrate and try to point out embarrassing flaws for the new RMB oil contract, and then later they're going to retract their words because this thing has been stress tested, and I believe The Voice has been involved in some of the stress testing.
Interesting.
Okay, well, go to the goldenjackass.com website, bounce around, and sign up for the newsletter. Let me close with two of my favorite compliments. I say this almost every time now because it's at the tip of my tongue every time when I mention the website and clients. The first type is I was a client with your newsletter for a few years. I backed out for since 2015, and now I'm back. I wish I never left.
Yeah.
The other one is I've been listening to your podcasts and your interviews like this. I've been reading your public articles and figured that was sufficient. But out of curiosity, a year ago, I signed up for your newsletter, and I wish I signed up 5 years ago.
Exactly.
But I love when clients come back. One just came back a few days ago, sent me a personal email. It was very nice to see. So I hope people go to the website, bounce around and sign up for the newsletter. It's not your standard type of newsletter, and we can boast, we as part of my Jackass crew of colleagues, there are 9 of us, together I'm the spokesman, but regarding the forecast for the Hat-Trick Letter, over 80% of them are correct.
Yep.
Probably closer to 90, and the voice likes to joke. He said, Jim, what you call an incorrect forecast just hasn't happened yet because it's slow in developing.
Yeah. Very well said. Very well said.
But I do have some errors. I have some errors back in 2011 and 12 regarding the bond yields. I thought bond yields would go up because of increased debts and a vanishing act for bond investors, but I did not factor in the derivatives and the interest rate swap, and Rob Kirby gave me a good education on that.
There you go. Rob's a good guy. Jim, Thank you so much for coming on with us. And folks, again, goldenjackass.com, goldenjackass.com. Get yourself an education. Bring yourself up to speed. Join the Hat-Trick Letter. It is more than worth it right now. It is more than worth it, especially in this day and age where so many events and so many things are happening so quickly. So once again, folks, it's goldenjackass.com. He is Jim Willie, the Golden Jackass. I am the ape, the gorilla, and we are over and we're out. Take it away, CJ.